Sing for us, Beyoncé. Someone sneered, and the laughter erupted like thunder. That was the moment Amara knew. This wasn't just teasing. This was humiliation carefully choreographed. It was the final day of Spirit Week at Jefferson High, and the auditorium pulsed with adolescent energy. Seniors were slouched in seats, bored teachers scanned their phones, and the cheer squad had just finished their routine. Principal Delacroix, a pale man with the personality of a stapler, tried to maintain order, but the students owned the room now. That's when Jason Barnes, captain of the football team, darling of the faculty, son of a state senator, raised his hand and said with faux innocence, "Can we let Amara sing something for the crowd? You know, for diversity." The auditorium cracked with laughter. Amara sat still for a beat. Her hands clenched the edges of her chair. She was the only black girl in her entire grade. Maybe the whole school if you didn't count the janitor's niece who transferred out in freshman year. She knew this wasn't about music. It was never about music. "I think it's a wonderful idea," Mrs. Hendricks chimed in from the front. Her voice was sweet but shallow. "You did mention singing in your admissions essay, didn't you?" She had. Once. In confidence. About how her grandmother used to hum spirituals while braiding her hair. That moment, private and precious, now dangled like bait in front of wolves. With a slow inhale, Amara stood. "Sure," she said, her voice calm and cold. "I'll sing." She walked to the stage. Each step rang louder in her ears than the last. Her palms sweated. Her throat tightened. The microphone was already set, almost as if someone had planned this in advance. The lights dimmed. She stared into the crowd. Jason was smirking. A group of girls in pink tank tops whispered and giggled. Someone shouted from the back, "Give us some gospel, girl." Her heart thundered, but her spine straightened. She didn't pick Beyoncé. She didn't pick anything from the top 40. She closed her eyes and began to sing Strange Fruit. The first line cut the air. "Southern trees bear a strange fruit." The room shifted. The laughter stilled. She sang the next line, voice trembling but crystal clear, and the silence became suffocating. "Blood on the leaves and blood at the root." Her voice deepened, grew. It didn't matter that she was only 17. That auditorium became a courtroom, a battlefield, a church. Her voice wasn't just melody. It was memory. It was mourning. It was her ancestors screaming through her lungs. Teachers stopped what they were doing. Phones fell from fingers. Even Jason Barnes blinked. No one moved. Amara's body shook, not from fear now, but from power, from centuries folding into her in that moment. Her hands stretched outward as the song swelled, filled with grief and rage and unbearable grace. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Someone in the back wept. When she finished, the auditorium was silent. Not because they respected her, because they didn't know what to say. The spell broke when Principal Delacroix cleared his throat and offered a limp clap, joined half-heartedly by a few others. It was meant to be polite, to file the moment away. But a local journalist had been the recovering Spirit Week fluff for the town paper and had recorded the whole thing. By that evening, the video had gone viral. A black girl silenced an auditorium with a 1930s protest song? In Jefferson County, Georgia? The headlines practically wrote themselves. Within days, news trucks lined the street outside Amara's modest home. CNN requested an interview. Trevor Noah tweeted the video with "Give this girl a record deal and a congressional seat." Celebrities reposted. Historians unpacked the song choice. Music critics dissected her phrasing. But back at school, the walls were colder than ever. Jason never apologized. Neither did the school. In fact, Principal Delacroix had called Amara's mother to discuss the distraction. Her classmates avoided her. No one sat beside her at lunch. "You embarrassed them," her grandmother said, sipping tea from her chipped mug. "They don't like mirrors held to their faces." Amara didn't cry. She hadn't cried since the performance. But she wrote, every night, about the stage, about the silence, about what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, for the first time and then punished for it. She received death threats. She also received college offers. She was invited to perform at the National Civil Rights Museum. They called her the voice of Gen Z resistance. Still, she rode the same school bus each morning, walked the same halls, endured the same stares, until the day of the town hall meeting. Someone had leaked a group chat from Jason's friend circle. It was brutal, racist, graphic, and very real. Suddenly, The town wasn't just talking about Amara's song. They were talking about Jefferson High, about how no black teachers had ever been hired, about the Confederate statue near the parking lot, about how the Southern Heritage class was required, but African American history was too controversial. And people were listening. Amara didn't plan to speak that night. She sat in the back, hoodie up, hands in her lap. But when the floor opened for public comments, she stood up, not to perform, but to testify. And when she spoke, it wasn't just a 17-year-old girl talking. It was her grandmother's wisdom, her mother's dignity, her ancestors' grief, her own fire. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She told the truth. And this time, no one dared to laugh. The video of her town hall speech went even further than her song. News anchors quoted her line, "I am not your entertainment. I am your mirror." A former U.S. president retweeted her with the caption, "Leadership has no age limit." And while Amara still walked the same cracked sidewalks to school, everything else in her life was shifting quietly, but permanently. She got letters, hundreds of them, from black girls in Arkansas, from queer students in Utah, from teachers in Maine who confessed they had never dared include Billie Holiday in the curriculum. They thanked her. They cried. They told her, "You helped me breathe." But Jefferson High didn't, couldn't, wouldn't. They painted over her locker when someone scratched the N-word across it. They suspended her when she posted screenshots of the group chat with Jason Barnes and his friends. They never invited her to the senior gala. And that was okay. Because somewhere along the way, Amara stopped needing the validation of people who only saw her as a spectacle or a threat. She started a blog, Strange Fruit Replanted. It became a digital collection of essays, poems, protest songs, interviews. Her voice wasn't just echoing, it was building a movement. She hosted Zoom roundtables with students from all over the country. She taught young people how to organize, how to write, how to use a microphone like a sword. She got invited to Washington, D.C. The invitation was plain. A simple email from the Department of Education's new Youth Cultural Initiative. They were planning an event for Black History Month. They wanted Amara to headline. She read the message 3 times before she could breathe. At the same time, her grandmother's health was slipping. Quietly at first. A misstep here. A confused look there. Then the hospital visits. Then the oxygen tank. Then the hushed conversations in the kitchen Amara wasn't supposed to hear. "You go," her grandmother insisted. "Don't let this house hold your wings." So Amara went. The first time she stepped onto the stage at the Kennedy Center, she wore her grandmother's scarf blue silk with white embroidered stars. Her hands trembled. But when the lights warmed her skin and the audience hushed, the nerves melted into clarity. She sang a medley, "Lift Every Voice and Sing," a piece from Nina Simone, then her own spoken-word poem. The mocking was the prelude. The applause lasted almost a full minute. A congresswoman came backstage. A producer offered a contract. A Yale professor said her voice reminded him of Mahalia Jackson. But none of that stuck with Amara the way the little girl in the yellow dress did. She was maybe 9, hair in 2 tight buns, eyes wide. "Can I be you when I grow up?" the girl asked. Amara knelt. "No," she said, smiling gently. "You gotta be better." That moment haunted her in the best way. In the weeks that followed, she turned down the record deal. She turned down the PR team. She turned down the tour. Instead, she applied to Howard University. Not for music, for sociology. "I don't just want to sing the change," she wrote in her admissions essay. "I want to study it, build it, protect it." She got in. The acceptance letter came the same day her grandmother passed. It was a spring afternoon. Warm wind. The house was quiet. Her mother handed her the envelope with shaking fingers. Amara opened it, read the words, and didn't speak for a long time. Later that night, she sang at the funeral. Not to perform, to grieve. She chose Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, her grandmother's favorite. As the last note faded into the ceiling of the old Baptist church, people rose to their feet not in applause, but in reverence. Her grandmother had never had a passport, had never left the state of Georgia. But through Amara's voice, her story had reached the world. Fall came quickly after that. College was another universe. Howard felt like breathing for the first time in years. She was surrounded by Black excellence, by professors who didn't treat her like a miracle or a martyr, just a student hungry to learn, eager to fight. She met Nia there. And if the world wanted a love story too, well, they got one. Nia was an activist majoring in political science. tattoos up her left arm, a laugh that made people pause mid-sentence. She challenged Amara from day one, asked questions no one had dared to before. Do you like the stage? Or are you just used to surviving on it? Amara couldn't answer that right away, but she wanted to. Together, they organized protests against the school's ties to exploitative corporations. They created safe spaces for queer Black students. They even got arrested once, chaining themselves to the gates of a building that refused to rename itself after a segregationist donor. The mugshot went viral. So did the petition. And that building? It got renamed the next year. Amara kept singing, but only when she wanted to. Only when the story called for melody, not just words. By junior year, she had released a collection of essays. Echoes Aren't Enough. She was nominated for a National Book Award. Her blog reached 1 million subscribers. And back in Jefferson County, Jason Barnes? He lost his football scholarship after more leaked messages surfaced. He now worked at his father's dealership, mostly staying off social media. No apology ever came. Amara didn't need it, because by now, her story had outgrown that stage. One day, a teacher from Jefferson High reached out. A young Black woman said she had pushed for changes in the curriculum. That strange fruit was now part of the 11th grade poetry unit. That they played Amara's speech on the first day of Black History Month. She ended the message with, "You cracked something open. Now we keep building." Amara stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't cry, but she lit a candle. For the girl she used to be. For the stage they tried to weaponize. For the voice they tried to mock. And for all the voices still waiting to be heard. She wasn't a symbol, or a saint, or a songbird. She was a storm, and the country was still listening. By the time Amara graduated from Howard, the world knew her name, but she never let it become her identity. The fame had always been a side effect, not a goal. She wasn't chasing cameras. She was chasing change. Her senior thesis, Performance as Protest, the Black Voice as Weapon and Wound, drew from centuries of Black musical resistance, Negro spirituals, jazz, blues, hip-hop, and examined how those traditions were both celebrated and co-opted. She wove her own story into the framework not for attention, but for context. She defended it in front of a packed hall. Her professors, her classmates, Nia in the front row, all watching as Amara traced a red thread through centuries of melody and pain. She ended with the words, "If you ask us to sing, be prepared to hear the truth." The room gave a standing ovation. And once again, someone was filming. A clip of her final statement landed on a PBS documentary. Then NPR picked it up. Then a TED Talk invitation arrived. But that summer, she turned everything down. Every email, every offer. She needed silence. Because beneath all the triumph, something had been growing quietly in her chest, grief, thick and unprocessed. It came in flashes. A scarf in a drawer. The smell of cornbread. The voicemail from her grandmother she couldn't delete. So she returned to Georgia. Not to Jefferson County, but a few hours south, to the house where her grandmother was born. It had been abandoned for years. Ivy crawled through the windows. The floorboards moaned under her feet. But it was hers now. Amara spent the summer restoring it. Every day, she scrubbed, nailed, painted, wept. She planted a garden where her great-grandmother once kept collards and beans. She painted the kitchen yellow. She found a dusty record player in the attic and played old vinyls at dusk. Mahalia, Nina, Aretha. Voices like hers, but older, heavier. She let them fill the rooms. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't public. But it was healing. Nia visited sometimes. So did her mother. They would sit on the porch with sweet tea, watching the sky go lavender. Nobody asked Amara what was next. Until a letter arrived. From the White House. At first, she thought it was a joke. A form letter. But the signature was real. The president wanted her to lead the new National Arts and Justice Initiative. It was a coalition of artists, educators, and historians aiming to bring racial justice education into schools through creative expression. It was everything she believed in. Everything she had dreamed might exist one day, and they wanted her to shape it. She cried. Then she packed her bags. Washington, D.C. looked different now. Not like the gleaming promise she'd seen as a teenager, but a battlefield. And she was ready to fight with curriculum drafts, policy meetings, art exhibits, youth panels. She traveled across the country: Newark, Oakland, Atlanta, Detroit, holding forums in school gyms and community centers. She listened more than she spoke. She heard stories from students just like her, silenced, tokenized, erased. But they were fighting back too. Writing plays, directing short films, leading walkouts. Amara wasn't alone anymore. She was part of something bigger. And eventually, the initiative began to take root. State by state, school boards started to adapt the program. Teachers got trained. Poetry entered classrooms like wildfire. Students performed monologues based on historical figures. Music departments taught resistance songs. Libraries ordered her book in bulk. But with visibility came resistance. Fox News ran a segment titled, "Is This Girl Brainwashing Our Kids?" Comment sections exploded with slurs. An anonymous caller left a voicemail at the initiative's headquarters. "We didn't let y'all sing for nothing back in the day, and we ain't letting it start now." Amara didn't flinch, but her staff did. One intern broke down in the bathroom. Another considered quitting. So she gathered them one afternoon, 6 brilliant young people, full of fire but weighed down by fear, and she told them a story. About that day on the stage at Jefferson High. About the silence that followed. About how fear always shows up when power is shifting. "They want you quiet," she told them. "Not because you're wrong, but because you're working." They didn't quit. They expanded. The initiative launched a summer camp in Baltimore, then a national youth conference in Chicago, then a mentorship program pairing students with Black writers, musicians, and filmmakers. And somewhere in all that movement, someone nominated Amara for a National Humanities Medal. She found out by email, sitting in her office, eating leftover Thai food. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she laughed, not from disbelief but from something deeper, something like gratitude, or maybe exhaustion. The ceremony was televised. She wore a navy blue suit and her grandmother's scarf. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage, shook the president's hand, and smiled for the cameras. But in her speech, she didn't talk about herself. She talked about the boy in Mississippi who wrote a protest rap after his cousin was killed by police. She talked about the girl in Arizona who painted murals of enslaved ancestors in her school hallway and got suspended. She talked about the students in Kansas who performed "A Raisin in the Sun" and donated their ticket sales to bail funds. "This medal," she said, "belongs to every young person who turned pain into performance and performance into power." And the nation, once again, listened. But Amara never let the stage define her. She returned to her Georgia home every winter. She wrote by the fireplace. She weeded her grandmother's garden. She watched the stars without a phone in her hand. She and Nia built a life slowly, quietly. No headlines, just love. And one day, maybe a child. Sometimes Amara would sit on that old front porch and remember the moment her voice first echoed through a mocking auditorium. How far away it felt now, and yet how close. She still got letters. From students, teachers, parents. Some asked for advice. Some just said thank you. But her favorite ones always began the same. "I didn't know I could speak until I heard you sing." Years passed. Amara's name became a chapter in high school history books. College freshmen wrote term papers about the Jefferson High incident and how her song ignited a national dialogue. Documentaries cited her as a turning point for Generation Z's approach to cultural protest. But for Amara, none of it felt like legacy, it felt like continuation. She didn't start a movement. She inherited one. And she knew the weight of that truth every time she stepped onto a stage, into a school, or opened her mouth. She never forgot the sound of laughter on that first day. The sneers, the silence, the way people clapped, not out of awe, but discomfort. That memory stayed with her, even after all the medals, the honors, the interviews. That's why she said yes when Jefferson High finally called. It had been nearly 15 years. A new principal, a different town council. The Confederate statue was long gone. The mascot had changed. The school was holding its first annual Social Justice Arts Festival and the new faculty chair wanted her to headline. Amara almost declined. She hadn't been back to that auditorium since that day. But Nia looked at her across the dinner table and simply said, "It's time." She returned quietly. No press, no fanfare, just Amara. She pulled into the lot on a cloudy Thursday, the same cracked concrete under her tires. The school looked different. Renovated windows, murals of civil rights leaders on the walls. She walked through the main hallway slowly, her heels clicking on the tile. Students passed her, whispering, "That's her." Some asked for pictures. Some just smiled. Others had no idea who she was which. In some strange way, was a kind of relief. She stepped into the auditorium and froze. The seats had changed. The stage was new. But in the middle of the ceiling, that single spotlight still hung, the one that had once burned so cruelly on her face. A young girl greeted her at the side of the stage. A junior. Black. Hair in thick braids. Nervous but excited. "I'm supposed to introduce you," she said, voice cracking. "I've watched your video like 100 times. I even memorized your town hall speech, 'I want to be a writer too.'" Amara smiled. "Then write louder than they can ignore." The girl nodded, swallowing emotion. She walked on stage and, with a trembling voice, introduced Amara to a packed auditorium. Students, parents, teachers, board members. The same kind of crowd. But this time Amara walked out by choice. She stood beneath that spotlight and looked across the sea of faces. There were Black students now. Asian. Latinx. A rainbow of voices in the front row. The auditorium no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like a choir. She didn't sing. Not this time. Instead, she spoke. About that day. About what it meant to be mocked. About what it meant to hold your breath while people laughed at your voice, then to let it out anyway. About surviving humiliation and rewriting it. She talked about her grandmother. About loss. About rage. About hope. Then she looked at the young faces and said, "I am not here to inspire you. I am here to remind you that you already carry what you need." And they listened. Truly listened. Afterward, a group of students performed a choral arrangement they'd composed based on her original performance of Strange Fruit. It was layered, complex, woven with modern harmonies and classical structure. Half the auditorium was in tears by the final note. Amara stood and applauded until her hands stung. Later that evening, she walked the empty hallways of the school alone. She stopped outside the old music room. The door was slightly open. Inside, a few students were rehearsing a new piece, one she didn't recognize. A song she hadn't written. But something about it carried her cadence. The rhythm. The pain. The power. She smiled. The legacy wasn't hers. It belonged to them now. That night, back in her hotel room, Amara looked through a folder of letters handed to her by the school. Dozens of them. Some typed, some handwritten. All from students who'd participated in the festival. She read each one, heart swelling. One note, scribbled in blue pen, stood out. "They used to tell us to stay quiet. You taught us to get loud." She folded it carefully and slipped it into her journal. A few months later, she stepped away from the initiative she helped build. Not out of exhaustion, not in defeat, but because she knew when to pass the torch. A younger generation had risen, one she helped shape, but who no longer needed her to lead. And that, too, was a victory. She went home. For real this time. She and Nia bought the land adjacent to her grandmother's house and built a small creative retreat center. They called it the Listening House. It was open year-round to artists, writers, musicians, and students, especially those whose voices had been silenced elsewhere. There were no rules, only invitations. To rest, to create, to remember. Amara taught writing circles under the oak tree out back. Sometimes she'd sing, but only when it felt true. They kept the garden going. Let the porch swing creak. Hosted bonfire nights where no phones were allowed, only stories. One summer, the girl who had introduced her on stage at Jefferson returned. She was older now, studying literature, still unsure of her path. Amara sat with her under the stars. "You don't owe them a performance," she said softly. "Only the truth." The girl nodded slowly, as if understanding something deeper than words. Amara never stopped receiving letters. Some were from parents whose children wrote plays about resistance. Some were from teachers in red states, terrified but trying. One came from a retired journalist in his 70s who confessed he had once laughed at her video, but later wept when he understood what it meant. And then there was the letter from the student in Jefferson County who wrote, "I wasn't even born when you sang that song. But every time I walk past that auditorium, I remember, silence doesn't protect us. Your voice did more than echo, it planted something." Amara framed that one. Years later, her name was etched into a monument in Washington, alongside other voices of cultural resistance. But she didn't attend the ceremony. She stayed in Georgia, watching the sunset with Nia on the porch, humming softly to the wind. Because she knew she didn't need to be present to be remembered. She had already sung herself into the soil, and the world had listened. Not because she was famous, not because she was perfect, but because one day, They made her sing to mock her, and she turned it into a revolution. The end. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.